Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. Oh, do I have a good one for you. Great news. Just as I came out to the shed, I just found out that I reached my standing goal for the day. So I wanted to share that up front. You know, I'm going to be in a good mood when that happens. Just wanted to start with something to celebrate. I have two excellent guests joining me today. Two experts in their fields. Two guests who've never been on the show before, because I'm always finding great new guests for us to learn from. And both of these guests we learn a lot from. Joanna Schwartz is a UCLA law professor, practicing lawyer, whose new book encompasses basically 20 years of her work. It's titled Shielded: How the Police Became Untouchable, and it is fascinating and really, really important. And then I've also got, for the first time, Tom Merritt, who is the host of a great daily podcast that deals in all things tech. He's an award-winning independent tech podcaster and host of this really great show that I highly recommend called Daily Tech News Show, and I think you're going to love that conversation as well. I start with Joanna at 17 minutes, and Tom begins about 49 minutes in. And our intern, Odessa Sun, is here with some good news, a good news story for the week. But first, I want to thank everybody who responded to what I mentioned at the opening of yesterday's show, that I was considering a run for town council. I got so many great, supportive, and enlightening, insightful emails. Thank you very, very much. I'm one day closer to it and really, really excited about the potential of a campaign where I would meet a lot of people, connect folks to other resources and each other. Whether or not I win or lose, I think that would be an amazing experience. And to document it, I'm really excited about the prospect. Hopefully I'll have an announcement within the next few days. Really excited also to have our 18-year-old Ava back from Spain. She had a wonderful trip and has come back even more confident about her independence than she was when she left. Great to have my girl back, and taking my other girl skiing with my dad. I think that should give people good vibes, because I'll be on the mountain with my daughter and my dad, and it just doesn't get any better than that. 3 generations, Hunter Mountain, New York. Come check us out. Did I just plug our appearance skiing? Anyway, a couple of news stories I want to share, and let's start with the big news from the New York Times that Ivanka and Jared have been subpoenaed by the special counsel Jack Smith. And I saw, and always go to Allison Gill at Mueller, she wrote, for analysis on that. She always takes on a few replies, criticisms, questions. One person said of that news, yay, this should really help the average American be able to afford things like gas, groceries, and electricity. Allison replies, if you don't have a democracy, gas will be your last worry. Another person said, yawn, they're going to ignore it. Nothing will happen to them. Same old news. And she writes, can't ignore a federal grand jury subpoena. And lastly, one person said, yeah, 2 years later, they finally get subpoenaed. And she writes, you can't subpoena them until you've gotten the testimony and all phone and email records of everyone beneath them. So I thought that was a pretty good and enlightening few follow-ups to both cynicism and partisanship that you're bound to hear as a result of this news. And it looks like the foreman of the grand jury in the Georgia case has shut up, or media outlets have wised up that maybe we shouldn't be putting her on TV anymore. And one of the most influential people on the right in all of media is a guy named Charlie Kirk. This is why I can't take them seriously almost ever, because only do they say things like this on the right, talking about demons and witches. Listen to Charlie Kirk claim that the Georgia grand jury woman is actually a witch.
And now we learn about her love of alchemy. No joke. She posts on her social media page about herbs, about casting a circle, demonic circles, how to cast spells. Not a joke. This is all on her social media page. She actually is a witch. She's into witchcraft. And as soon as I saw a video of her, I said, whoa, that is someone who thinks they're Hermione Granger, like totally. Like she is LARPing on live television, live action role playing, trying to be a serious person. She just can't pull it off.
All right. Well, you have been able to pull it off pretty long, pretty well, very successfully, calling her a witch. You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with a witch or a sorcerer serving on a grand jury, is what I would argue. All right. Well, I thought that was interesting. Now, in one more story, yesterday in Trumpland, President Trump himself traveled to the small town of Palestine, Ohio, to draw attention to himself and the ongoing cleanup following a train derailment and the release of toxic chemicals just outside of the community. He made remarks inside a fire station, spent a large portion of his remarks attacking President Biden, casting the disaster in political terms, accusing President Biden of ignoring a red state community. And then he toured the area and made some other remarks. And I guess he went to McDonald's and said that he knows the menu better than they do, which is a weird thing. And he brought water. He brought a whole bunch of cases of stale Trump water. But I think the important thing is, and this is really seriously important, that all of the major cable news networks did not carry Trump's speech, his comments in Ohio. They did not carry them. And that's a big, big deal because lots of folks, I think, rightfully blame a lot of the cable media and other media outlets that covered Trump so much and so seriously and intensely at the beginning of his campaign back in 2015 that they helped create the man. And in this case, that wasn't the case. So good that they didn't carry it live. And I think that's a step toward progress and minimizing and marginalizing the man, which is exactly what a lot of other Republicans are starting to do. We're in the thick of it now, everybody. You're seeing Mike Pence and Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, who will, of course, be the nominee. I keep saying it. Nobody takes him or me seriously. And you're probably right, but still going to keep saying it. But yeah, we have arrived at the silly season of the Republican primary race. It's gonna be ugly because Trump is gonna keep burning everybody down. He's going after Ron DeSantis, and it just can't be helping him. Who is it helping him with? I thought this was interesting. Jordan Klepper of The Daily Show went to the Nikki Haley launch. I think it was her launch, and he talked to Nikki Haley voters. And well, listen to this amazing exchange with the always very nimble Jordan Klepper and a former Trump supporter at the Nikki Haley launch in Charleston, South Carolina.
When did Trump lose your support?
The nail in the coffin for me with Donald Trump?
Let me guess. Charlottesville.
No.
But, okay,
you're not going to guess it.
Kids in cages.
Nope.
The insurrection, January 6th.
Nope.
Okay. Wait, hold on. First impeachment.
Nope.
Second impeachment.
Nope.
Okay, inviting white supremacists over to Mar-a-Lago.
No, but criticizing DeSantis before his election.
Wouldn't have guessed it. So that's the line right there.
That was the nail in the coffin.
I would have guessed kids in cages.
I told you wouldn't have guessed it.
I know.
Unbelievable. Or very believable. Like I said, he's attacking DeSantis. Why is he doing that? How does he win? He's being minimized. He's being marginalized. I'm telling you, he's looking old and tired and useless and more like a loser to some who have supported him as to the rest of us who always thought that. All right, few other news stories. I thought I'd mention Nipsey Hussle's killer has received a sentence of 60 years to life in prison. South Carolina has their state house there is okayed permitless carry of handguns, one step closer to joining 25 other states with some form of so-called constitutional carry laws. Terrifying. A Texas man who attacked police and also threatened Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has gotten a sentence of 3 years. President Biden fell on the steps of Air Force One again on his way home from Europe. 11 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces and scores more hurt in the West Bank. Humiliated Russian President Vladimir Putin was forced to pay Russians to attend their pro-war fatherland event in a Moscow stadium. And CNN's disgraced Don Lemon somehow was allowed to return with an apology that he put in a can and sent out into the ether. You know what? I loved what Howard Stern had to say about this.
But the great part of the story is, Robin, for me, they said, listen, we got to handle this situation now. They took Don Lemon, they suspended him for a day, and they sent him right into sensitivity training. And then he came back the next day, he was all cured.
Yeah.
And I said, that's fantastic. They must have an expert over there. I've been in therapy 30 years, I think, and I'm still not.
And you're not cured.
This guy went to sensitivity training in a day. And they fixed him.
Came back saying all the right things.
I'm just saying, I would like to interview the person who does the training because this person's a genius.
Yeah.
Maybe you need sensitivity training. See, this is what you haven't gotten.
Let me tell you something. I've been insensitive my whole life. And if I could be fixed in a day by this person, I don't know the name of this person, but I want this person in my life.
I just love how well he paints the absurdity of the situation over there at CNN. Okay, well, those are all of the bad news stories, mostly bad news stories, but that's what news is, right? It's the aberration. It's the thing that is not the norm, and that's why we don't have good news, because that's what we expect, good news. And now with some actual good news, our intern, the great Odessa Son at University of Wisconsin, Whitewater. Hello, Odessa.
Hey, Pete. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very excited for your good news story. I like this segment. It gives you a chance to come on here, and it gives everybody a nice piece of good news to celebrate. So what have you?
You like nature, don't you? You are a tree-hugging granola freak.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I'm a tree-hugging granola freak is 100% accurate. Yes, I've done both of those things.
I think you would like this one today. Monarch butterflies rebound again, beating last year's total, proving success is not a... The annual Western monarch count to measure the population of overwintering butterflies shared fantastic news for the second year in a row. Motivated by the surprising rebound in 2021, volunteers' excitement continued to grow when the early reports hinted at a consecutive year of improved numbers.
Wow. That's great news. Volunteers, they volunteered to tally, I see the story, individual monarchs. Talk about nature freaks. That's what you're doing. You're like, what are you doing this weekend, Odessa? I'm going to be volunteering to count individual monarch butterflies. Whoever these heroes are, they should be celebrated. This is good news. Well done. Good choice of story. I like it.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned you like to watch birds out of your window, so maybe you can start looking for butterflies. Well, you have bird feeders. I know that.
I know that's. I remember you saying you like to watch birds out your window. You made me feel like I was 90 and I can't, I don't move anymore. I know you like to look out your window and watch birds. No, the truth is, yes, I do. And I do have bird feeders, and they are being attacked by red-headed woodpeckers every day. But I love this story. The monarch is to have a story like that is always really good. So thank you very much for the good news. And anything else, Odessa?
I actually wanted to let everyone know I went out to vote for the Wisconsin Supreme Court election yesterday.
Oh, good. So I hope you voted for the person that would protect your reproductive rights and not the person who wouldn't.
I actually did. I'm surprised that you would know that. But
I didn't see, I don't know who you voted for, but I'm guessing and hoping that's who you voted for. Yeah, the general election, April 4th for the state Supreme Court. I'm glad that you went out and voted in that. And finally, I want you to tell people, I guess you could say this is good news. I think it's crazy, but it's time to let the audience know that you are a bartender at a bar and that there's a new thing. Really huge across the country. It's called the hurricane shot. Can you just tell us, everybody, this is serious. She's serious. This is a real thing. And we actually have video of her serving these shots. What is it, Odessa?
So best way to describe this is someone comes up to the bar, typically a male. I've never had a female come up to me and ask me for this, but I wouldn't give it to her regardless. But yeah, you walk up to the bar, you ask for the hurricane shot, and basically all bartenders across America know what that is. You set up a water cup that the bartender holds. You pour the person a shot, and then the person takes a shot. You splash them with that water cup, and you give them a slap on the face. And that is the hurricane shot for you.
So just to be clear, they drink the shot. As soon as they drink the shot, you throw a cup of water in their face, and then you hit them.
Yes, that's the order in which you do it in. Yep.
You have now sent me 2 videos of you beating the shit out of your customers.
And only because I make sure beforehand, because I get a lot of people who come up, men, I should just say men because it's only them, who come up to me and ask, can you give my friend a hurricane shot? I said, well, do they know what a hurricane shot is? Because I refuse to give it to somebody who has no idea what's coming for them. So it's a consensual slap on the face, so I shouldn't get in trouble for it. But there is way too much footage out there now of me just giving endless amount of men.
Listen, this is the only one of probably the only job you could have is working on this show, where that would be an asset, I think, because it's content. I mean, and no one, IBM doesn't want you out there hitting people if you're a young person. But Stand Up with Pete Dominick fully encourages this, and we're very happy and proud of you that you are serving these hurricane shots. And I hope that we can share a video on the Hangout. Is that possible? I think we can make that happen. Maybe I'll get a hurricane shot tonight and show a few different angles. Well, we already have two videos that I've seen. They're shocking. Maybe just to... You have to see this. Odessa really hits this guy, who's like 8'7", by the way, so hard. She really nails it too. So, all right, come to the Hangout.
Every bartender, they give a different velocity and a different angle.
My God.
They have maybe different intentions going into it. And I would say, because I'm a tennis player at heart, I always cross court, put that top spin over. It's a natural.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe these people are still conscious. Anyway, follow Odessa on what's the Instagram or whatever you want to plug.
Deep Shots UW.
There you go, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you tonight. But even if you don't join us, we're definitely watching that video.
All right, Pete. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Odessa. There she goes, folks. All right, now it's time to get to my first guest. And a reminder, I cannot do this show without your support. It is ad-free, listener-supported exclusively. So please sign up right now at patreon.com/Pete Dominick for a paid subscription. Just like Addison Whetstone, Brian Castor, and Cindy Kay. And almost 740 more of you. We got to get to 3,000. That's always been the goal, and I continue to work towards it. So tell your friends, so that we can keep doing this daily show where I interview these super smart people, give you a breakdown on the news, and have a little fun while we're at it. And, of course, also build this amazing community that we have. And I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout, and you can always connect via the Discord app if you're a subscriber. All right. Well, my first guest is a professor of law at University of California, Los Angeles. Her writing, commentary, and research about police misconduct, qualified immunity, and indemnification in local government budgeting have been featured in pretty much every major news outlet in the country. I just want to read a little bit from the jacket of her new book, Shielded: How the Police Became Untouchable. In recent years, the high-profile murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others have brought much-needed attention to the pervasiveness of police misconduct. Yet it remains nearly impossible to hold police accountable for abuses of power. The decisions of the Supreme Court, state, and local governments and policy makers have, over decades, made the police all but untouchable. And one of the blurbs on this book here is Sherrilyn Ifill. She says, a must read for anyone who wants to understand why we lack an effective system of legal accountability for police violence and misconduct in our country. Want to understand how we got here? Joanna Schwartz's smart, pragmatic proposals for change ring clear and true. All right, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time ever on Stand Up, the author of Shielded,
Professor Joanna Schwartz. Welcome to Stand Up. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Fair to say that, like, this book you've written is kind of informed by 20 years or so of actual legal work that you have done.
That is accurate to say. I was a civil rights attorney in New York City in the early 2000s and started thinking about some of the questions that I ask and describe in the book. And then when I became a professor at UCLA, I really dedicated myself and my academic career to studying how civil rights litigation works on the ground, really understanding how these cases make their way to the courts, the various barriers to relief, the justifications that the Supreme Court and state and local governments have used to make it so hard to sue, and whether any of those justifications actually pan out in real life. And so I've been doing all of that research for a long time. But after George Floyd was killed in May of 2020, and I was fielding calls from legislators and journalists, I decided it was really important to write this book to explain these barriers in a way that people who don't tend to read law review articles could understand, and also to explain how all of the barriers work together, because it's not just qualified immunity, for example. It's a whole range of shields that really prevent people from getting justice from the beginning to the end of the litigation process.
Yeah, you really are the perfectly credible person. I'm sure there's a lot of other lawyers out there who do that type of work, but to have actually, we have these political arguments and we all think we're experts, and yet you actually live inside the argument that someone is making and can prove it right or wrong throughout years of work is one way to talk about why this book is so interesting, written from your point of view. But let me just dispense with the obvious elephant that is in any room that you're in, which is about your feelings towards police, towards law enforcement. I worry that we're so divided in this country that we don't listen to a thoughtful conversation. And I certainly worry that if there are, members of law enforcement and their families that listen to our conversation or any conversation with you, that they don't listen, that they don't see it as being in their interests, and they, even worse, see it as being anti them and their families. I'm sure you've had to deal with that accusation your whole life. So what do you tell those people?
Yeah, I tell them that this book and really my work is focused not on whether police as a whole are good or bad. People can come to the book with a variety of perspectives. I certainly know police officers who are wonderful people and have law enforcement in my family. But the focus of my book is on what happens when police cross the line. What happens when police violate the Constitution? What are the consequences? And my hope is that we can all agree that when police really violate people's rights, when they kill people without cause, when they throw their lives into chaos, that there should be some form of justice, that we want to have a system where officers who have done wrong are brought to justice and are discouraged from doing wrong again, and police departments that properly supervise and manage their officers. And if you survey police officers, they believe there should be systems of accountability as well. Well-meaning, well-doing officers don't want a system where bad officers are not held accountable. I think that the danger that we are in right now in a society, particularly around police reform, is that the terms of the debate have been so warped that, to take qualified immunity as an example, law enforcement officials tell officers, and union officials tell officers, and, Tucker Carlson tells officers that without qualified immunity, they will be bankrupted for reasonable mistakes made on a split second. And if you believe that, then you will think that I, in advocating for the elimination of qualified immunity, am trying to bankrupt your family member for reasonable mistakes. That is not true, because that is not what qualified immunity does. And officers are protected, just to take that claim itself, officers are protected from financial liability, not because of qualified immunity, but because state and local governments across the country have what are called indemnification agreements.
Yeah.
And so that's what protects officers, not qualified immunity. So if we could get to agreement on the terms of the debate, I would hope that we could actually move something forward.
Well, we are a long, long way from that. But if anybody's going to get us there, it's this book. I mean, it's a book filled with research, experience, nuance, narratives, heartbreaking as they are. And we have to get a few people who know all of the terminology and have your type of credibility at the table to discuss this, as opposed to seeing it discussed in a few-minute cable news segment, or even, in a congressional hearing where it is often, I think, misrepresented. But before you beat me to a terminology, qualified immunity, I wanted to define some of these things. So I'm going to go even further back. But before I do one more thing, you kind of took this on, which is one of the most common arguments you hear is if you have all of this accountability for police officers, then you won't have any other they won't have any police officers, because no one's going to want to do this job if they think that if I make the wrong decision in a split second, I'm going to lose everything and maybe even go to jail myself. You've been hearing that your whole career. What do you say?
I say it's simply not based in the facts. I mean, to take the criminal prosecution point, officers are charged in less than 2% of fatal killings, and they are fatal shootings, and they're convicted in less than 1/3 of those cases. And when people are not killed, or there's other kinds of misconduct, criminal prosecutions are even rarer. It's exceedingly rare. Officers are also not bankrupted in these cases. I looked at 81 law enforcement agencies over a 6-year period, and what I found was that 99.98% of the dollars paid out to plaintiffs in police misconduct cases come from local government budgets, right, or from insurers, not from officers. So the idea that people are going to be bankrupted, it's a powerful, frightening catchphrase, but it just doesn't have any relationship to reality.
Yeah, I learned so much about all of this in your book. I thought actually the most kind of interesting place to start, and it's not very I don't know how divisive I can be. I got to get ratings here, I got to be so interesting all the time. But the truth is, it matters to define certain things. We have to talk about the Constitution. We have to talk about the Supreme Court. And I think we have to talk about a kind of a definition of civil rights that you see that the vast majority of us don't see. I know the first thing I think of when I hear civil rights is I think of the Civil Rights Act, which was, fought by a civil rights movement of the 60s. That's where I start. But that's not where you start, because we all have certain rights and there is a Constitution, and most of us either don't know what it means at all, or we have some understanding and we interpret it however we see fit. So what about you? You've done this your whole life. What are our civil rights that are being violated in these cases?
Well, if you look to the Constitution, the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And that sounds like, a pretty good protection. But I tell the story in the book of a man who was sitting at home playing video games after delivering pizzas one night, and pounding on the door from police officers who thought that he owned a motorcycle that they thought might have been involved in a crime. None of that was true. He'd done nothing wrong. But he went to answer the door with a gun that he legally possessed because he was nervous as to why people were knocking on his door. And the officers shot him. And they shot him and then were found not to have violated the constitutional rights of this man because he was holding a gun. And so they reasonably feared for their life. Now, this was unreasonable in multiple ways. It was unreasonable that they came to his door. It was unreasonable that they pounded on it at 1:30 in the morning. It was unreasonable that they didn't announce who they were. It was totally reasonable that he came to the door with protection, given that he had no idea who these people were. And then the court found it was reasonable for the officer to shoot him. And this is just one example of many that I
think that's probably for the listener, the best thing about your book. And the worst thing, I suppose, right, is that you feature actual people's lives who've been affected by it. And you can see a preview of it I saw I think it's on your website. And people can check it out there because give me another one. I don't know. You start with James Monroe in the book, but pick anybody else that you want. And by the way, it's not just poor people. It's not just black people. You pick people from all different categories and backgrounds whose civil rights have been trampled on, and they've gotten seemingly maybe no justice, because I guess if you get killed, you don't get really much justice. But
yeah, well, Andrew Scott, whose story I just told, was white, and I do tell the stories of people, white people, black people, indigenous people, Latino people, people from the north, south, east, west, rich people, homeless people, people who have long criminal records and none at all, because even though people of color are disproportionately stopped, searched, killed by the police violence and misconduct can touch everyone. And one story that I open the introduction with is of a man named Henri Norris, a 78-year-old black man who was sitting in his home watching the news when police pounded down his door, held him at gunpoint, pushed him to the floor, ignored him telling them that he had a heart condition. They were there because they were supposed to be executing a warrant on his next door neighbor's home, a home that looked nothing like his home.
Right.
But they did nothing more than help him put the doors back on his home. And when he sued, the case was dismissed, and it was dismissed on qualified immunity grounds because there was not a published court decision. There actually was a very similar court decision, but it wasn't published in the law books of cases. And so it wasn't binding on the court. And so he recovered nothing for the loss of his privacy, his dignity, and all of the fear that he suffered that night. And there are a lot of stories in the book. I try to tell stories of people who you haven't heard of before, because those cases that don't get public attention are really the ones where the shields are strongest. Yeah,
I mean, that story you just told reminded me of where I was when I read it a few days ago, and that I went and poured a stiff drink as I continued, because there's so much of that. It's so important to learn about in this book, Shielded. Okay, so what do you think? You could pick a lot, unfortunately, is something that most people outside the legal community, or maybe even in, don't really understand, because there's so much of that in this book, which is why it's so important. Like I really didn't know, as much as I study these issues and read about the news and talk to law enforcement members and scholars like yourself and lawyers and human rights and stuff. I pick anything, Joanna.
Well, I think that one area that will surprise a lot of people is that it's hard to find a lawyer in these cases. You know, if you read the news or just sort of have your own view about lawyers around our country, you would think that there are thousands of lawyers that
when you see these multi-million-dollar lawsuits against police departments or police officers or whoever it is, the plaintiff, and you would think that lawyers would be sniffing around for some injustice to look for accountability for because they got money.
Right. And there are cases, large cases that receive a lot of public attention. George Floyd's case, Tyree Nichols' family's case. These are high profile, large damages cases. And those families are not going to have and did not have trouble finding a lawyer. But in cases that may not involve someone's death, for a case like Henri Norris, for example, or a case where people's lives have been shattered, but they may have prior criminal convictions, for example. They may be houseless. Those people, when lawyers consider their cases, think about what kind of damages would a jury actually give to this plaintiff, this person who's not a perfect victim. And then they think they don't get paid anything if the client loses. And because of qualified immunity and all the other barriers to relief, losing is a real distinct possibility. So they think that these are risky cases to bring. This client isn't going to be that likable to a jury. And instead, I could just bring a personal injury case or a medical malpractice case where I don't have to deal with qualified immunity. And many lawyers I've spoken to will take one case where they were outraged by what happened to their client, invest tens of thousands of dollars of time and money, have the case dismissed, and then think, you know what? I'm going to go back to my other line of work. And so there are pockets of really dedicated, excellent civil rights attorneys, particularly in cities across the country. But if you get out of those big cities, you're going to have a hard time finding a lawyer.
How much has the Supreme Court played a role in creating the current imbalance dynamic, making police, as you say, untouchable? Because you write a lot about the Supreme Court's role in several different decisions and why they mattered. And we're obviously, I suppose we could talk about the current Supreme Court and what, if any, change you would see given the makeup. But certainly there have been decisions that have mattered so much that you write all about. Tell me.
Sure. Well, the Supreme Court's fingerprints are all over this book. And although there are things that state and local governments have done to insulate police from consequences of these cases, particularly when they're successful, the Supreme Court is the primary actor here in creating these barriers to relief. They have made it difficult for attorneys to get paid in these cases. And just as one example, Congress, when in 1976, passed a law that would allow plaintiffs' attorneys in these cases to get paid by the government when they win these cases. And Congress did this because they considered bringing these cases really important to secure civil rights protections. But the way in which the Supreme Court interpreted that law ended up meaning that defendants, cities, and officers could offer settlements that would waive the entitlement to attorney's fees. And the Supreme Court said that was fine. And most cases settle. And so most cases don't have this protection that Congress gave to ensure that those lawyers are properly paid. The Supreme Court created qualified immunity. The Supreme Court has restricted the protections of the Constitution, and the Supreme Court's made it difficult to sue local governments.
Hold on, the Supreme Court has restricted parts of the Constitution.
Well, yeah. So if you think about what unreasonable searches and seizures might mean under the Fourth Amendment, you certainly would think that it would be unreasonable to be shot in your own home when you had done nothing wrong. That sounds unreasonable.
That's an egregious example, which is not as common as probably many more you could give.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if you think about the power of police to stop and frisk people, I mean, this is something that happens to millions of people every year in cities across our country, that people just going about their lives are stopped and police officers run their hands all over their bodies in very personal ways when they have done nothing wrong. The Supreme Court is the reason that police can do that. And the Supreme Court ruled in the late 1960s that officers needed only reasonable suspicion to stop and frisk people, and then have interpreted what reasonable suspicion means to essentially mean that police can do this for any reason or no reason at all. And reasonable suspicion can be based on neighborhood, on race, on ethnicity. And so that is latitude that the Supreme Court has given police to do all of this.
And there's a lot more. There's so much more, I think, in terms of the Supreme Court decisions. But one of the other arguments is, listen, if police departments, if police officers do something wrong, they violate your civil rights, they can be held accountable, and because you can get a settlement and you can sue them. And if that's the case, then that's how their behavior changes, because they don't want to be sued and voters don't want to pay out those settlements. And so officer behavior and police departments will change their training. They'll change internal procedure because of the accountability of these lawsuits, which we always hear about. Is that true?
Well, it's not as true as often as it should be. And part of it is the way in which these lawsuits are budgeted for and paid. The money to satisfy settlements and judgments in these cases typically comes from central budgets, not the police department's budget, but central city budgets. And they only amount to less than 1% of most local governments' budgets, which is, although tens of millions of dollars sound like a lot of money, when you're talking about enormous city budgets and enormous police department budgets, it's a drop in the bucket. There's another problem with the expectation that we have about these lawsuits changing behavior, which is that I've found through my research that in many jurisdictions, police departments don't gather and analyze information from these lawsuits. You would expect that if you were sued or you had an employee and that employee was sued, you'd try to understand what happened in that case so you could prevent it from happening again. But in many cities, these cases are treated just as the cost of doing business. They're defended by city attorneys. Their money is paid out from central funds. And there's no effort made to understand what happened in the case to prevent it from happening again.
One of the things I couldn't believe, and I still don't believe it, even though you have all the evidence, and so I know it's true, but I don't believe it because it's unbelievable to me, is that there are actual, in many instances, police officers and their superiors in the department that don't even know there was a lawsuit filed. They don't even know that. And I don't think that could be possible. How could they not know that someone filed a lawsuit against something that they did while on the job? How could they not know that? Wouldn't that be in their interest? Wouldn't that be in the police department's interest? Wouldn't that be in every citizen, voter, taxpayer's interest? How could that possibly be, Professor?
It is shocking. And it's actually one of the very first things that I started thinking about and wondering about when I was a civil rights attorney more than 20 years ago, because I worked on a class action against New York City's Department of Corrections, challenging conditions on Rikers Island. And I deposed, meaning questioned under oath, a whole slew of officers. And I would look at their personnel files to prepare for the deposition. And there was no record of any lawsuit in their personnel file. When I questioned them and asked them if they'd been sued before, they would say, I don't know, or they'd say, yeah, I think so. But they wouldn't know how many times, they wouldn't know what the allegations were. And the supervisors, even up to the assistant wardens and the wardens, they didn't have this information either. And I think that it's because if I've, speaking to other law enforcement officials over the years, there's this view that lawsuits are just people trying to make a buck, that you should just ignore them because it's just people bringing frivolous claims. But I talked to another person who said, police should be thinking of these as citizen complaints with money damages attached.
Yeah.
These are complaints. These are complaints about wrongdoing. And a department that wants to do better needs to pay attention to those cases.
I think I'm reading your book and I started thinking about it as the dumbest idea, but I'm sure you can somehow translate it into something policy. But it's like you can give your Uber driver a rating. When a police officer pulls me over because I rolled through the stop sign, which happened not too long ago, she then came up to me and she recorded the entire conversation. I could then, at the end of the transaction, after she wrote me a ticket, she could then say something like, hey, if you want to rate this interaction, text or go here, as every store does or so on. And then and if I was an asshole and I was like, she was really mean and disrespectful, then her supervisor would look at the tape and be like, that's not true. You handled that perfectly fine, according to us. But the point would be, it would be in the officer's interest or it'd be in the community's interest. Because if one guy is consistently an intimidating jerk, he's violent, and people have that, you can rate them. Is that an absurd idea? Because I would think it'd be in the officer's interest, in the department's interest, and certainly in the community's interest.
I think that it's a great idea. And I think that
it will never, ever happen.
I think it is unlikely to happen, but it is a surprise. In fact, if sure, you can do it on Yelp or Uber or whatever. You also can do it if you go to the hospital or go to
every government agency. Stick with the public agencies, right? Because we don't want to, always be piling on police. Like your teacher, every public service. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just think it's.
I think that we recognize in a lot of other aspects of our life that data is useful and getting that feedback is useful.
Delta will not leave me alone. Please tell us about your experience. I'm like, I flew with you stop it. It's been years. Sorry to interrupt you with my joke.
Oh, well, and Delta, all of these, the reason that police say, that they don't want some of this information, they say it'll be frivolous or people will be making things up. You might make things up on your response to Delta, but police officers are trained. In fact, it's their job to sort through imperfect evidence. It's what they do when they solve crimes. And so they should be able to take that evidence in and assess it and see if there's patterns, see if there's things that they should explore more. But this is against a backdrop of policing that has for decades and decades been resistant to civilian complaints. So that is a huge aspect of our history of policing and police reform.
Yeah, this real disappointing, sad state of affairs between law enforcement and the communities too often, and that you're not able to, be able to file a complaint in any traditional way. I knew that when I talked to you, we'd get about half an hour, and I knew reading the book that we would barely scratch the surface on identifying the problems, which we have. But I still do have to end our conversation with the way that you end the book, touching on, as you call it, the chapter, A Better Way. You talk a lot about, actual laws that have passed in places like Colorado, but, pick one or two things that you think would be good reforms, good solutions that have either been put in place in some places or could be put in place. And I feel like you have to pick things that the Supreme Court, run by Boss Hogg, isn't going to overturn.
Yeah, I certainly do talk about reforms that the Supreme Court and Congress could put into place. But at this point, my hopes are much more with state and local governments. The benefit being that readers or listeners can actually influence what state and local governments do easier than they can get things done in the Supreme Court or Congress. You mentioned Colorado, and I think Colorado is a great example of really important changes that they made in the month or so after George Floyd was murdered. They passed a comprehensive police reform bill that created some bright line rules preventing chokeholds and no-knock warrants. But they also created a better accountability system. They basically did a workaround around qualified immunity because they passed a law that said that you can sue for violations of the state constitution. And in those state law claims, qualified immunity isn't a defense. And the Supreme Court cannot say anything about that because they don't speak to state constitutional issues. So they've created this alternative. They also have done something really interesting, I think, with deterrence. They have said that local governments are going to pay settlements and judgments in police misconduct cases. And I think that's a good thing because most officers aren't going to have the money to satisfy settlements and judgments in these cases. But the statute also says that if an officer's acted in bad faith, they can be required to pay up to $25,000 or 5% of a settlement or judgment. And that creates a financial sanction for an officer that I think will get their attention.
They might say the officer will say, someone will say, well, who decides, who interprets bad faith? I'm sure.
Yeah, well, it's the local government that's going to interpret it. And the devil is absolutely in the details. After that bill was passed, there was one suburb of Denver that said, we are never going to find that our officers acted in bad faith. And so that certainly can happen. But this is a place where constituents can, and I hope do, say, look, when officers act in bad faith and the city finds that they do, shouldn't there be some consequence for those officers? It's not requiring payments in every case, not every case across the board, but only cases where officers have acted in bad faith. Can't we agree that that's a place where officers actually should be made to pay a little something?
Probably not. We should be able to, though. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's pretty. It seems very reasonable, as does so much of what you're saying in this book. It's not radical. It's really important that people learn about what's happening. And I hope that you're invited in every single cable news segment and everywhere else, even though they won't ever do justice as a conversation. Like, your work and your voice should be heard on these because it's clearly not. I can't believe how much I learned, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, there she goes, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time ever. Joanna Schwartz. Go follow her on Twitter and let her know that you heard her here or any other social media outlet. It's all in the show notes, and you can find out more there and definitely get this book. It's going to be really very important, I think. She's going to hopefully be popping up on more important panels, conversations everywhere as a result of this. JoannaSchwartz.net, at JC Schwartz Prof on Twitter. And again, of course, the book Shielded. So go check that out. I really learned a lot. Got very enraged and upset while reading that. Accountability and fairness under the law. Pretty basic stuff, I think. I wish it weren't so controversial, but it will continue to be, of course. All right, let's move on to my second guest of the show, who I'm very, very excited to have discovered his work. Tom Merritt is the host of a daily podcast called The Daily Tech News Show. And when I was getting ready to talk to Tom, I listened to the show a bunch of times, and I loved it. I learned a lot from it. He's got a great team supported him over there. He's an award-winning independent tech podcaster, host of that show and several others. I think you're really going to like my conversation, and I think you're going to love this show. You should go check it out for sure, and I hope that he'll join me here on this show to recap and dig a little deeper into several of the issues that he knows so much about and covers on his show. Two great experts on today's show. Now let's get to all things technology with the brilliant Tom Merritt.
All right, there he is, Tom Merritt. Very excited to have you, sir. I got to say, I started listening to your show, and I love it. I'm going to become a new subscriber. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks. This is the way I get subscribers. I one by one, so I appreciate that.
Super smart, man. I mean, you've been in this game a really long time. You've worked in pretty much, corporate media in every possible way. I think you even interned at one point at NPR back in the 90s. I read your resume. But now you're doing your own independent thing, and I think that's great for a lot of reasons. But I just think it's a good way to start by the kind of talking about the integrity and the ethics. You've worked in corporate media, you work in independent media. Why does a show like yours, arguably, in my opinion, have more integrity than a lot of the big corporate names?
Well, one of the things I can do is just cover things the way I want to cover them, without having to think about any kind of other implication other than my audience. So that's the way I've constructed things, is because we are mostly Patreon funded. We also get some direct funding through listeners through Acast, but mostly listener funded. We can just be responsible to the audience. So our theory is we put the content first. We're gonna try to get our content as accurate as possible. Give you insights. Our mission is to help you understand tech. Then the audience is next in line to be like, okay, we've figured out our content. How are we making sure you get it in the way that's useful for you? And then the rest of it comes behind that.
But just one more point about that. Like, if you did take ads, and I'm sure that there are certain companies from other digital media companies, like, I don't know, Wired or Mashable or something, much less actual products, electric lawnmower company or something like that. That would mean potentially, a listener could be like, well, he's biased. He's taking money from this or that. And that's the concern, especially for a show like yours, which is constantly critical of any number of products, services, and companies.
We're trying to be honestly critical too. Like, sure. A lot of times we end up defending things that our people in our audience are like, that's horrible. And I'm like, well, let's explain, because we're free to do that. We do have an ad supported public feed, but I don't know who the advertisers are. So I work with Acast for that. I give them a list of like, none of these categories, we're not interested in advertisers from there, but everybody else, don't even let us know. We don't want to know. And I don't do any of the host read ads. I've done those before.
Yeah,
there's definitely a way to do them to keep them from being problematic. But if you have a car advertiser, every time you do a story about cars, you're going to have that in the back of your mind. Like, okay, I need to wall that off. Not knowing and not reading those ads means you never have to think about it.
Yeah. Well, that's why there's a lot of integrity. And there's a great cast. You have a great team over there. It's not just you. It's really, really great. I love listening to the Daily Tech News Show. People should subscribe to it right now. And you can thank me later for turning you on. And I would like that. I would like you to send me an email, long email thanking me. You guys do basically tech news every day, about 30 minutes of it. And you really do, like, you unpack all kinds of stories in a way that you don't have to be a tech expert to understand. That's how I hear it. And that's why I like it. But who is your audience?
Yeah, our audience goes everywhere from long-serving sysadmins who want to know if Linux is going to be able to run on Apple Silicon, which is a story we ran yesterday, all the way to people who are just like, I need to make sense of my phone. I want to understand, why is Facebook doing what it does? Should I get off of it or not? Should I use Twitter? So we're playing to all audiences. But what we've tried to do is strike that balance of saying we respect that you are knowledgeable, but we also are not going to try to talk above your heads and try to keep that accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I really like just when you talk about products, tangible things. I heard an episode where you were talking about both an air purifier and kind of like this composting bin and service. And it was a really robust, comprehensive conversation. You looked at pros and cons of that and everything, but I really like that. And I feel like you guys are all nerds and looking at it from a very scientific, data-driven approach. Like, does this actually work? Do we really need an air purifier? Is the carbon footprint in the end worse? And it is really comprehensive. So you look at a lot of different products as well, right?
Oh, yeah. We're constantly pushed by our audience to not just cover Apple, Google, Facebook, right? So when it's important to cover those companies, obviously we're going to cover them because that's important. But we're always looking for, what are these interesting next new things? What are these bubbling up trends? So that composting tech from Mill that you talked about, we found out from our audience, like the tech itself is not new at all. It's the service that they're providing that's new. And that's one of the best parts about doing what I do is we have what I call the smartest audience in the world that kind of helps us expand that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And you give them a platform on the show as well, which I think is really important. They seem like really nice, well-meaning, smart people with a sense of humor as well.
For sure.
So, the other thing that I think is really important is that you talk about how government's role in all kinds of different things. And I guess you could arguably say the court's role as well, because this week you guys definitely helped us understand what the Supreme Court was looking at. Two different arguments today and yesterday, Section 230. It's really hard to understand. Apparently, the reporters are saying that, even the people in the room were falling asleep. The judges were falling asleep. So it's so important. What do you break it down just a little bit for me, the Section 230, which I know you've spent a lot of time in your show breaking down in depth.
Yeah, it's something that I think is widely misunderstood, which is why I've given it some extra time to help people be able to make up their own mind about it without misunderstanding. Because people on both sides of the issue tend to try to simplify it to make it sound one way or another when it's very limited. Essentially, before Section 230 was implemented in the 90s, as a tech platform, the court cases were not sure whether to treat you as a publisher, like a book publisher, or a distributor, like a bookstore. And what had happened was if you didn't moderate at all, if you were a platform that said people are going to say what they're going to say and we're not going to touch it, we're not responsible for it, then you weren't liable. But that also meant that you had basically a hellscape of stuff out there on the platform.
Right.
On the other side was if you touched anything, the courts were like, well, now you're the publisher. You've exerted editorial control. So now you're liable for every single thing on your platform. And that would cause platforms to engage in prior restraint, essentially, to say, well, we have to decide every single thing you post, whether it's okay or not, which is too much. You don't want that. You don't want every single thing you post to go past a censor. And so Section 230 said no provider of a service will be treated as the publisher or speaker of information provided by another provider. In other words, by the user. There's some exemptions to that. There's some other parts of it, but essentially what they were saying is we're not going to punish you for moderating. If you're trying to just make your platform a decent place for folks to have an honest conversation, you shouldn't be liable for every single thing people said about that. That has led a lot of people to call it a protections and safe harbor and things like that. And it certainly is something that was more clear in the 90s than it is now, especially as we got things like ChatGPT and AI that can recite poetry and stuff. But it is very simply trying to do that. That's why it was put in place in the first place.
What about just the question of, everybody wants to make things right or left and very political. I know you try to stay out of that to a certain extent, but it's hard to avoid when you have, Republicans on the Oversight Committee screaming at former Twitter executives and other tech executives, and Democrats being plenty upset with them, too, in terms of regulation and so on. But the one issue is about censorship. It doesn't seem to be that complex to me. These companies have to be as responsible as they can to their own bottom line, and they don't want to host certain type of content. They try not to, and certain type of people think and post a certain kind of thing. Do you have any way, Tom, to help us understand how any of these social media companies at least look at and police what gets posted on their sites in terms of a political outcome?
Yeah, I think we give these platforms way too much credit for being able to carry out their intentions. With the billions and billions of posts that are out there. In fact, even back in the 90s when Section 230 was being created, they were saying there's no way you can look at every single post. And it's only gotten more and more posts since then. So I think there are certainly fair claims that a particular platform might tilt one way or the other, maybe even subconsciously, just because the employees tend to have a particular point of view or not. But whether that's effective, whether they can actually tilt things one way or another is a whole different situation. And the little bit of work that's been done to sort of objectively analyze that and say, like, okay, are we seeing a tilt one way or the other? Or are we seeing a change of opinion because of a tilt one way or the other? So far, they haven't been able to find anything. So I think if you're trying to say, oh, there are people who are biased in positions of influence in these companies, you're absolutely right. Or if you're trying to say, and those people are having an effect, I don't know if it's so clear.
Both you and I have worked in major media companies, and we know while there's a lot of editors and a lot of decision makers, there's also a whole bunch of lawyers, and they're often pretty apolitical. If anything, they're about making money and protecting the company from legal issues, from being sued. I mean, you could look at what's going on with Fox and Dominion. That's a perfect example. So it's like even though they're a right-wing news site, they have a lot of concern about being sued, and here they find themselves being sued. I guess that's one example. We should give credit or take credit away to the legal department of these media companies, which are less political often and more about protecting the bottom line.
Oh, yeah. The legal people that I have dealt with in my career basically tell you, no, don't do it unless they have a really, really good reason why you should. Copyright law is the worst on that, right? Anytime you want to make any fair use of anything, the lawyers are going to say, well, yeah, maybe, but better not. One of the biggest chilling effects on discussion is the fear of a copyright lawsuit. Because we don't have a law that says you can have fair use. Fair use is a defense, which means to defend it, you have to go to court, which means the lawyer is going to say, like, yeah, I'd rather not go to court. Let's just not do it.
Oh, we could get into fair use. And I'm sure you have very often on your show. Really very important because everybody's, creating content and using somebody else's content. And it gets pretty complicated. And a lot of people are well-meaning and well-intentioned, don't realize that, hey, you can't do that. I mean, I've gotten pinged for using certain comedians' bits or copywritten music that I didn't know the rules, and then you can't make money off that. Fine, you stop. But it's very confusing, certainly for creators, much less anybody else.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so many other things I want to talk to you about. In general, though, how do you see, if you can even generalize, how government at any level can regulate these giant tech companies? Because the way I see it is I'm a bit ageist, my audience knows, but a lot of these people are very old, and I'm 47 and I'm confused about a lot of this stuff. I'd rather have you be a senator questioning, the head of Google, or at least be on the staff. The point is, even if there was a bunch of Tom Merritts up there, it's still very hard for government to keep up with the private tech companies in terms of regulating them. That's how I see the problem. And then it gets political from there. But how can government effectively regulate Facebook, Apple, Google, all of it?
Yeah, they're holding hearings on a court case affecting Section 230. And Justice Elena Kagan, I think, made a statement that I feel like is emblematic of this. She said, these are not the 9 greatest experts on the internet. Right. That's step one. Just be aware of that. Be aware that you are not the expert on the internet. And then be able to rely on independent experts. And I think that's where it gets tough, is like, okay, but where do you find them? Where do you find an expert that isn't under the influence of Google or Facebook or somebody else? But yeah, you can't just go with your gut when it comes to the internet, because, or technology in general, because even the people making the products don't fully understand all the implications of them. So you're trying to make your best guess about where stuff goes. My personal opinion is that you have to be very, very careful with regulation, because you're often regulating for the situation that's over. Classic case of that is the Microsoft antitrust case. By the time they finally ruled on Microsoft being a monopoly, it was irrelevant that they were a monopoly. Everybody had moved on to smartphones and Web 2.0 and all of that. A lot of times when you regulate, all you do is help the incumbent. You get Facebook to jump through a lot of hoops to do stuff. But Facebook loves that because they can afford to do it and know that smaller competitors won't be able to afford to do that and come in and challenge them.
Yes, we could also talk about how hard it is for smaller competitors to ever enter any market in any tech product or service. But it sounds like what you're saying is it's really, really hard for policymakers to keep up with the companies, whether or not we agree that they should be regulated or not. And then there's that, obviously, conflict of interest when it comes to campaign finance. Maybe Google, Apple, Facebook is spending a lot of money donating to this senator or congressperson's campaign, and then you have to be concerned to some extent about that and every other special interest. And so it's not simple. It's really complex. You talk a lot about everything tech. It's hard to, everything is tech, you name it, from mental health to cars. So talk to me about EVs. I know you've done a lot of episodes on that. What do you want to say, Tom, about the future of the automobile industry? The way I see it right now, the biggest problem is that these cars are still unaffordable for the vast majority of Americans, much less people around the world. And so I kind of want to know when they're going to be affordable for others, if ever, and when they're going to really dominate markets.
Yeah, the electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle markets are really interesting because on the one hand, you have something you've never seen in decades, which is new companies, not just Tesla, but Rivian and BYD out of China, and it just shaking up the market. You are seeing the existing auto manufacturers deal with it by coming out with EVs and using their expertise and finally reacting to this. And you're going to have a more competitive marketplace. That gives me hope that you're going to continue to see prices fall. Tesla cut its prices and then saw a rise in sales. Take the hint, everybody. If you bring down the price, more people can afford to buy your cars. I think it was interesting and smart for Tesla to come in at the top end to say these aren't like little podunk vehicles for hobbyists. These are slick supercars. That got a lot of people to take them seriously. But now it's time to bring it down. They've brought it down to sort of the mid-sized luxury level. Let's bring it down to the Honda Civic level and the Toyota Corolla level. And I think that's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. However, autonomous vehicles are going to change who wants a car. They're going to change depending on how good they get, how fast they get, whether you even need a car.
Yeah, because my neighbor and I could share a car,
or your entire neighborhood could just,
We will. Don't you speak for my entire neighborhood. We would never share. No, but
I'll share with Edgar. You're right, but I don't know about mine.
Oh my God! They left it a mess. These kids leaving Cheerios everywhere. No, talk to me about what that looks like. The autonomous. I interrupted you with my joke.
Yeah. No worries. Autonomous vehicles are not going to get as good as fast as everyone would like them to get, but I think they're getting good faster than the most pessimistic people think they will. And the ideal is that you get them where, probably in mapped areas, maybe not just everywhere possible. So this is mostly going to be useful in suburban areas with really nice straight streets. Not as great in rural areas, not as great in downtown areas. But you're going to get these vehicles that you can just call and say like, hey, I need a car right now. The car comes within minutes. You jump in, you tell it where you want to go. It drops you off and you go about your business. Yeah. Whether you can like reserve a car so that you can keep stuff in it, that's probably going to be an option. But overall, when you consider insurance and maintenance and payments, it's likely to bring down the cost enough that some people who are, driving like I do, a 10-year-old car, might look at it and go, you know what, these autonomous services are good enough now. I'll just use that.
There's so much more to talk about, a couple more issues. I'm trying to prove to everybody listening how you can speak to all of these issues right off the top of your head. So certainly when you're prepped to host Daily Tech News Show with your team, it's even that much better. I mean, we could just jump from issue to issue, and I want to, which is the next one is streaming television or just TV or just how we watch TV. You did a show a couple weeks ago titled 2024 Will Change Streaming TV Forever. Tom, what do you know?
So I don't know anything that anyone else doesn't know, but you just don't hear as many people talking about it. Everyone has been complaining that we have too many streaming services, and that is not wrong, but it's because all the companies want to be the winner, and so everybody's trying one. We are now past that point. Now we're seeing the consolidation phase begin. So you're not seeing people launching new streaming services anymore. You're seeing people trying to get you to use theirs before time runs out. And I think 2024 is when time runs out for two reasons. One, in January, there's an agreement between Disney and Comcast about who owns Hulu that will get resolved. Either side can force the issue in January of 2024. Disney holds most of Hulu, but Comcast has made noises that, yeah, they'd be fine buying it out and bringing it over to NBC. So
it's not a legal issue. It's a financial.
It's an agreement issue, right? When Disney bought Fox, they got 2/3 of Hulu and then had to come to an agreement with Comcast over the ownership of the rest of it. And that was that agreement.
By the way, Disney buying Fox is confusing to people because Fox Entertainment is a movie studio versus Rupert Murdoch's News Corp and Fox.
You're right. You caught me. I usually say when Disney bought most of Fox, not because
I still don't know how to describe it. I just know Disney doesn't own Fox News, and I think that
Disney bought everything but the broadcast Fox channels and Fox Sports and Fox News.
Okay, so they were all under one umbrella, and they were sold to Disney except for these few properties.
Yeah, so Disney got the movie studios, it got FX, a bunch of the cable stuff. It actually, for a short period, had the regional sports networks, but then was forced to sell those on to Sinclair. But anyway, that's a whole
by the way, you had a really interesting thing about on your episode, I think today or yesterday, about the MLS, the American Soccer League. Say what you will about them, signing a deal with, I forget which streaming service, but with Apple, which is an experiment of sorts. Like it sounds more like it's going to be good for MLS, probably no matter what. But for Apple, they're trying to figure out if you own a league. Exclusive rights to a league. Do I have that right? I heard that episode. Is that is what we're seeing happen?
Yeah. Apple has the exclusive rights to all the Major League Soccer matches, which means no blackouts because there's no competing interest to serve. And the match times can start consistently because Apple doesn't have to worry about, well, we're also covering the March Madness. So please move that time to a different time.
Oh, that's a really interesting issue. Getting back though to the streaming, streaming wars.
So there's the Comcast. Everyone's waiting to see who ends up with Hulu. That's the short version of that. And then in April 2024, there were some restrictions on AT&T's sale of Time Warner to Discovery. So Time Warner and Discovery are all one company now. And some restrictions on negotiating for another sale were put on in that arrangement. So again, not a legal thing, just an agreement. In April 2024, Time Warner Discovery can start talking about selling themselves. So in a world where all these companies are trying to figure out, okay, are we going to survive or do we want to sell ourselves to someone? Everyone's waiting for those two pieces to be resolved. Who ends up with Hulu and who wants to buy Time Warner? And after that, I bet you start seeing things like Paramount Plus and a lot of these other smaller services, maybe AMC, starting to look at selling their services as well.
Not AMC. I don't know anything.
Yeah.
What they
You're
do.
a big AMC fan.
I don't know. I'm sure there's a show I watch there, but I can't name it. Okay, so the big question for you and for everybody that knows stuff is the future. What Chat GBT and AI is going to do to our lives and our jobs. I mean, you even had an episode which deeply concerned me about will it replace podcast hosts? Chat GBT, everybody, there's different camps. I just talked with Jeff Jarvis, who I know you know and respect, but I don't know what your thoughts are on the future of our work and of our lives. How big of a deal is this? What do you want to compare this to? Because I've been told by smart people this is the biggest thing since the internet. It is going to be major disruption in our lives. Good, bad, I don't know.
Yeah, no, this is along the lines of computers replacing people, the internet coming along, because it's really good at stuff, but we don't yet know exactly what it's best at because it's not perfect. So right alongside the story that says, ChatGPT is going to eliminate all of our jobs and we won't have to have creative works anymore. You see the other stories of ChatGPT is a nightmare. It can't get anything right. And it's like, well, both those things are not necessarily going to be true. But
isn't it just going to get smarter and smarter? Isn't that the whole point?
It is going to get smarter and smarter, but there will be a limit we'll reach, right? At some point, the way the internet was like, oh, it's going to improve communication, so we'll never have a misunderstanding again, right? We'll hit that limit with ChatGPT where people say it's really bad at that. Yeah. Go back to the 90s and talk to an internet expert. You'll hear them say that. But so where I'm at with ChatGPT is it's a tool. It's going to replace some things we do. And the question is, how disruptive will that be? Will it just be a tool that helps us, where computers ended up really not replacing a lot of people? Or even a better example is databases and accounting software didn't get rid of accountants. It freed accountants to do a lot of other things. And depending on how you measure it, may have actually increased the number of accountants we have because of that. Is ChatGPT going to do that? Or is it going to be more like factories, where it's going to eliminate things so fast that a bunch of people are going to be thrown out of work, and we're going to not know what to do with them for a while until we figure out other jobs and new jobs that it makes possible.
Do you feel in any way settled on a prediction?
I tend to think it's probably going to be more useful, simply because we as humans tend to really value the authenticity, or at least the appearance of authenticity. And so if you put out a podcast that's got an entirely automated host, that's going to be a thing people point to and go, well, that podcast isn't as good. Right. We're always going to want that human touch. Yep. So I guess, and I could be entirely wrong on this, but I guess that these tools are going to be really good at helping us do more things versus replacing us. Maybe that's just wishful thinking because I don't want to be replaced. I don't know.
Yeah. Can I do a lightning round that you will hate because you love nuance?
Sure. Yeah.
Is crypto over? Cryptocurrency? No. If you have a Samsung or what's the other language that's not Apple?
Like Motorola
phone.
Or
the phone, Google phone.
Pixel. Yeah.
If you have anything that's not an Apple phone and you're in my group text, you're messing everything up. The rest of us are Apple users. You are not. You're messing us up. True or false?
Unfortunately, it's true, and it's not your fault.
That's why I like you. You're very sensitive and deep. It's not. I would much rather blame those people. They are outcasts. But you could talk about those phones and that technology in a far more thoughtful way. Flying cars are the current basically drone propeller, four rotor vehicles that fly. Do you consider them a flying car?
You mean the ones that carry people? Right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, sure. Why not? Yeah.
You heard it here. The flying car has arrived. If Tom has said, we've been waiting forever. And anything you want to say about a cool thing about the future of energy, hopefully renewable, clean energy.
Yeah. I love that the price of solar and wind are coming down. I love that there's some really interesting developments with wave energy, harvesting wave power, like off the coast, places like Scotland with really high winds. But we got to figure out batteries, man. And there is no battery tech that impresses me yet. And until we figure out not just how to make lithium ion batteries better, there's lots of good tech to make lithium ion batteries better, but something that's better than lithium ion. That's got to happen. That to me is the big impediment.
And do you pay attention to David Roberts, Dr. Volts on those issues? Do you know him?
I know of him, but yeah, I don't pay as much attention as I should.
I love his work, and I wonder if I'd love to see you guys in conversation. Tom, I can't thank you enough for joining me. I love your show, and it's not the only show you do. It seems like you host like 50 shows. I've been mostly referencing Daily Tech News Show, which you can listen to daily, and you should subscribe to and support independent media like Tom's. But really great to have you on, and I will definitely be bothering you again for more kind of general lightning round discussions covering a lot of stuff, and you can always go a lot more in depth by listening to Tom's show every day. Thank you, sir. So great to have you on.
Pete, you're too kind. Thank you so much for having me.
How about it, everybody? Tom Merritt. Wasn't that great? I really like that podcast, and you should go check out his co-host and the rest of the team behind that show, and I think he's going to definitely become a regular source and hopefully guest here on this show. So check it out, the Daily Tech News Show, everybody. Real smart stuff and independent media, which I love to promote. Again, thank you to Professor Joanna Schwartz. Check out her book, Shielded, How the Police Became Untouchable. Thank you to Odessa Son. Thank you to Pete Coe and John Carroll. Thank you to everybody who is a paid subscriber of this show. I cannot do it without you. Go to standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic right now. I hope to see you tonight at our hangout. Always a fun time. And I'm going to have some very special, exciting, surprise guests stopping by, I hope, as well. And I leave you with another amazingly inspirational and enlightening quote from the great Buddhist monk Pema Chodron, who says, "Not causing harm requires staying awake. Part of being awake is slowing down enough to notice what we say or do. The more we witness our emotional chain reactions and understand how they work, the easier it is to refrain from harm. It becomes a way of life to stay awake, slow down, and notice." There you go. Talk to you tomorrow, folks. Take it away, John Carroll.
Red and brown, she's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in. With other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? Cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and